In 2001, members of Congress thought that I should be fired because I dared suggest that how we were building America might be bad for our health, might be making us overweight, unfit, depressed, and lonely. In epidemiology, we call it a common source epidemic. When everyone begins to develop the same set of symptoms, it's not something in their mind, it's something in our environment that is changing our health.
How many of you are taking medicine for asthma?
It was a time when all three of us had an asthma attack at the same time. I mean, it got to the point where I had to choose which one of us was going to get on the machine first.
To see your son not be able to take a breath is one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with.
Went in for some treatment. They said I was going to take my foot off. Diabetes, not a good thing to fool around with.
We're seeing more of these problems in young children now. It used to be a problem of adulthood, and we're seeing this in children, 11, 12 years old, which was not a problem we were seeing maybe 15, 20 years ago.
I think we are looking at the first generation in American history to live less long than their parents. This is shocking.
Differences in life expectancy between the poorest neighborhoods and the wealthiest neighborhoods exceed 10 years.
And we tell people in our county, give me your address, I'll tell you how long you live.
What you're about to see could literally save your life. As we trace links between our growing national health crisis and many unhealthy city and suburban design decisions, we're going to meet people in communities who struggle with these issues.
I felt very compelled to stay and to be a part of the solution, and I hope that I have been a part of the solution for the last 27 years.
If one person in the whole world comes to me and says to me, I've changed because of you, that would totally make my life.
We will see how some are correcting past mistakes with stunning results, transformations that you can apply to your own neighborhood.
We think that one of the ways to address this problem is by having small-scale urban organic farms right in the city.
There has never been a medicine as good as the daily walk. In fact, anyone who has to have medicine can take less medicine over time if they walk, exercise, and live an active life. It's the only way that we start to see a return of the retail life of the street, the social life of the street, as well as the health of the people.
If you create the infrastructure, you create the opportunity in the built environment for people to do something different than driving by themselves, even in a place like Atlanta that loves their car, we thought people would change their behavior. And they might actually like the opportunity of walking to work, walking to lunch, doing errands on foot.
You need to do is make sure that the place in which you live and your people live are as nice as the places they would dream about visiting. And that's what public spaces and public health means to me, and they go together.
When you come home, you want to feel a sense of haven, and that's what people feel here.
And we can create environments that work very well for people and make us healthier, or we can ignore it at our peril. Join me, Dr. Richard Jackson, on a quest to improve the quality of all of our lives by designing healthy communities.
It is with great pleasure that I introduce our speaker. Dr. Richard Jackson is a professor and chair of environmental health sciences at the School of Public Health at the University of California, Los Angeles. For those of you that don't know, that's UCLA. And he is a pediatrician. He served in many leadership positions in both environmental health and infectious disease with the California Health Department, including the highest state office in environmental health in the state, the state health officer. For 9 years, he was the director of the CDC's National Center for Environmental Health in Atlanta, and he received the Presidential Distinguished Service Award. In October 2011, he was elected to the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences. He also served, and is very highly regarded through this service, on the American Institute of Architects National Board of Directors. He is a national speaker in great demand, and it is our pleasure to welcome as our first lecture for the A. Alfred Taubman lecture series this year, Dr. Richard Jackson. think I have one.
Let me know if I'm not loud enough. I may move this up a little more.
Can you hear it okay?
Are you okay?
Everyone's okay in the back?
How about now? Architects are health leaders, or should be. Maybe nobody while you're in school has told you in architecture or urban planning that you're really influencing people's health enormously, but that's what my theme is going to be here. The book on the left is the textbook I use at UCLA when I teach urban planning and health. I actually have appointments in pediatrics and urban planning as well as in environmental sustainability and in public health. And about half my class are public health students and the other half are from all the other departments. The book on the right is a companion book for the video series, and the clip of the video you saw was actually part of a 4-hour television series that showed on PBS over the last year or so. It showed in 2 million homes, and I want to thank, while I'm in Detroit, the Kresge Foundation, which put up pretty substantial funding to have that go forward. And I'm going to just talk about my own life. And since I came to Detroit, I thought I'd tease Detroit just a little bit. This particular ad appeared in the Daily Bruin of UCLA. That's our school newspaper. I wonder if it appeared in your school newspaper as well. Back in October 2011, it was the day my first grandchild was born, so I remember it well. And I opened up the school paper, and here's this ad from GM. And they had clearly done focus group testing and asked the average college kids, what's your life like? Well, I'm worried about paying debts, I'm worried about getting a job, my parents don't like me, my girlfriend's dumped me. And so the meta message that they pick up through the one-way mirror is, reality sucks. But reality doesn't have to suck. If you have the GM college discount and you go out and buy a GMC Sierra for $23,000 and spend the next 8 years paying it off, pretty girls will no longer smirk at you while you're on your bike, not polluting, not adding to congestion, getting physical exercise. Well, and stop pedaling and start driving. It's a message from GM. And so my students were furious with it. And I came into class, I had to show the students, and they're all tweeting GM saying, this is terrible, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. All of a sudden, one of the young women raises her hand and says, Dr. J, you don't know anything. That girl's not smirking at him. She's flirting with him because she doesn't want to be with the flabby guy driving the car. So in a way, this is a larger theme for what I'll be talking about this evening. GM's also right. The rates of depression in our society have increased 4-fold in the last 20 years. Partly we diagnose it, we have pills and stuff, but part of it is that people in the prime of life are feeling beaten up and mentally depressed. The most common chronic disease in America after tooth decay is depression. So we'll come back to this. I'm a pediatrician, and so the first thing that happens when you were taken into the pediatric office was height and weight. They do their blood pressure and other things as well, pulse and respiratory rate. And you want the child to be roughly, you want them to be about the same percentile in weight as they are in height. And we see about 5 children like this every single day in the United States. Physical exam looks okay, 50th percentile for height. What's your diagnosis on weight? It's much too heavy, right? If you're that heavy, your cholesterol's higher, your blood sugar is higher, your blood pressure is higher. And a good doctor is not going to say to the family, here, take all these pills. Start going to the overweight clinic, no soft drinks in the house, really begin to think about the diet. And 2 months later, the child comes back, and what's changed? Nothing. He can't change the food at school, he can't walk to school because of the design of where he is. And 2 months after that, he comes back, and he's having not lost any weight, and he's on something for his blood pressure, something for his cholesterol, perhaps something for his depression. I'm not making this up. In adult medicine, we're seeing at least 5 people like that every single day. And it costs about $400 a month. My larger theme here is that we have medicalized what is in essence environmental disease. And this environmental disease is a product or a byproduct of how we have built large portions of modern life and large portions of America. And the environment is rigged against the child, it's rigged against the doctor, and it's rigged against America the way we've done it. Now, when I was a medical student, we thought that 7% of all the money in the United States going to medical care wasn't generating real wealth, it wasn't shipbuilding, it wasn't road building, it wasn't manufacturing. 7% of all the money in the United States going to medical care was absurdly high. Now what is it? It's close to 19% of all the money in this country is going to medical care. There are multiple reasons for it. Part of it's technology, but part of it is this avalanche of chronic diseases. My original training was, I was going and doing investigations of TB and polio and smallpox eradication in India. I did a lot of infectious disease work, and I became impressed more and more over time that our diseases were environmental and in many ways driven by where we live. So we Americans now spend twice as much per capita on medical care than anybody else in the world. And therefore, we're the healthiest people in the world, right? We are number 46 for lifespan, despite spending twice as much as the next country in the list, which I think is Great Britain. So we're not getting very much for our money. And in many ways, my physician friends who are at the end of the disease pipeline, what my son as an internist says is, you know, Dad, the folks come in and I can't do anything about their weight. I can't do anything about their blood pressure, really, because they're so overweight. I end up giving them pills, but the truth is we've got to change their access to healthy food, particularly if they're poor, and how much they can walk around. Number 49. So if you go over to the Henry Ford Hospital, you'll see a lot of really smart docs. And if you say to one of the docs, gee, everybody today lives 30 years longer than their grandparents and great-grandparents did, they'll say, yeah, I'm a really good doctor. We've really saved a lot of lives. Where did the additional 30 years come from? 5 of those years came from medical care. And the other 25 came from 2 big I's. One you do and one they do at a public health. The other one I is immunization, and the other I is infrastructure. It's changing the physical environment. Clean water, clean food, sewage treatment, better homes, heating of homes, better ventilation. And prosperity is very good for people. You know, your income goes up, your education goes up, you live longer, you're healthier. So we think of medicine as fixing our health, but it's really these upstream determinants that are affecting our health overall. So we were living in Berkeley, and I had done a lot of work with California and pesticides and farm workers and other issues. And in '94, I was offered the job as the director of the National Center for Environmental Health. And I remember saying to my sons, we have 3 boys, I said, guess what? We're moving to Atlanta. We don't want to move to Atlanta. Well, yeah, but you can have your own bedroom, because with my salary, they couldn't afford to have their own bedroom in Berkeley. So, and we'll even get a dog. So we finally moved there. It's 94 degrees, 94% humidity, and my kids decide I am truly the stupidest man in the world. And I had a really tough haul, but I loved CDC. It was such an interesting job. And obviously with cancer clusters and birth defect clusters and childhood lead poisoning and housing work, and I had all the response to terrorism and emergency response under me, oversight of the cruise ships that docked in the United States, oversight of the destruction of the chemical weapons of the United States. Boy, you talk about crazy stuff. That was really hard. And one day in 1999, the head of CDC calls he's got a dozen or so directors, you know, Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and on and on and on. He says, come to my office. I'm writing a paper on the leading causes of death problems in the 21st century. So I'm driving down Buford Highway to the headquarters on a 94-degree, 94% humidity day, thinking about stuff that I do. So I'm thinking about real tiny stuff like atoms, and atoms of lead getting into our brains and scrambling children's brains, and lead being in homes, and lead in gasoline, and lead in, and the harm that these atoms of toxic materials were doing. I was thinking about molecules of toxic stuff like flame retardants, which are in these cushions that migrate into your body, into your kitty cat, into your breast milk and throughout our environment. So I'm thinking, and into beluga whales, and make, actually breast milk, it would be unacceptable for sale if it were commercial milk in the United States because of the toxic levels in human milk. I'm thinking about little stuff. I'm thinking about great big stuff. I'm thinking about the destruction of the ice mass over Greenland and sea level rise and depressing thoughts about, you know, the climate change. And I'm driving down Buford Highway. I'm always late, and it's sort of the typical mist in the air. And I look over to the right side of the road, and here's this woman walking along. She's carrying a plastic shopping bag, one in each hand. And she's bent over with osteoporosis, and she's in her 70s. She has red hair, and she looks like my mother. And I want to stop and give her a ride. And I don't do it. I go to my meeting. And we're sitting there talking about great big ideas, and I'm thinking, God, if that poor woman collapses and dies, the cause of death will be heat stroke. And it won't be absence of trees, heat island effect, blacktop roads, low albedo, a whole series of other things that are really the true cause of death. And if she's killed by a truck going by, the cause of death will be motor vehicle trauma. And it won't be absence of sidewalks, absence of public transportation, poor urban planning, and failed political leadership. So I went back and I called my friend Howie Frumke and I said, Howie, we spent the last 25 years of our careers focusing on stuff that's really remote to people's lives. What really matters to most people is where they live, where their kids live, where their kids go to school. And we knew all this back in the year 1880 when the American Public Health Association was started. And half the people that started the American Public Health Association 120 years ago were urban planners. I'm not making that up. If you look at them, they were really focused on planning as a way to improve human well-being. You think about Olmsted's efforts and all the rest. He said, Dick, that's a great idea. Fund my sabbatical. I'll come, we'll do work. We invited the best and brightest in the country, that's nice about being in CDC, to come and speak to us every single week on some topic we thought might be related to built environment and health. And we ended up writing a book which came out in 2003 on urban sprawl and public health. Now, in a way, what's behind and what I'm asserting is that many of the changes we're looking at, we think that this is the normal way to build a house. The rest of the world and previous generations never thought that the way to build a house was to build a garage and then wrap people around the garage. Because what that is the message of this particular building. As I was saying to Walt, that you could live in a place like this, and if you had a garage door opener, you could go years without meeting a neighbor. And so it's really, in fact, over the last 2 generations, our houses have doubled in size and doubled again in size. Our families have halved in size. Our bodies have gotten bigger, our cars have gotten bigger, our neighborhoods have gotten bigger. So it's really very interesting. This is a picture of the California state flower. And they work really well. Everybody can get a place that they want to live in, and it's really fast to get there for the first 5 to 10 years that they're in place. And then everybody else discovers the same thing. In order to meet the needs of all the cars we put in place, and this was a conscious decision. It was a military decision after World War II. It was a workforce decision after World War II to do a lot of building, to build out in the landscape. It actually had issues around national defense at the same time and whipping the economy by doing all this building. We took down 60,000 square miles of photosynthesis. So we now have the area equivalent of the state of Georgia is just under concrete. The area equivalent of Puerto Rico is under surface parking lots in the United States. So this has had major environmental impacts. Partly it bakes in the sun, and this is in Atlanta. Everything that lands in that parking lot ends up in the drinking water supply of Atlanta, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. You've taken the best farmland in the United States and put it under pavement and houses. And again, I'm not exaggerating. North of Philadelphia, all up and down California, wonderful farmland being paved over. My home state of New Jersey used to be the Garden State because it produced huge amounts of fruits and vegetables. And by 1955, 1960, the last crop that became concrete and houses as well. So the removal of all this photosynthesis means that, remember, trees trees, they do good stuff. They get rid of CO2 and they give us oxygen. 1/6 of all the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere is due to the removal of trees, of deforestation. The other 5/6 is due to fossil fuel burning, and how you build has a lot to do with how much fossil fuel you burn, whether it's to heat your house, cool your house, or get to your house. When I was born, the CO2 of planet Earth was 300 parts per million. It's now 400 parts per million. And in medicine, if you had a person in the intensive care unit and their CO2 level went up 33%, that person's dying. It's code blue time. You really have to intervene. So this is what's happened to CO2, and everything the scientists said about if the temperature goes up, it's going to get hotter, has happened. This is more recent. So this is a map. Some of you, I love landscape architecture, and I was given an honorary degree from our honorary appointment from them. And this is when you plant trees. Where's the frost period? And just over here's 1990. And here's telling you when to plant trees. I can't get a more recent one in 2006. So San Francisco has now become as hot and dry as Los Angeles, which has become hot as dry as basically northern Mexico. Detroit has become as hot as the southern portion, and Glenn's an expert on this, of Ohio and northern Kentucky. Atlanta has become as hot as Florida, and New York has become as hot as Atlanta in your lifetime. Not my lifetime, in your lifetime. In fact, you know the picture of the girl crying? We did that in Elgin, Illinois. We were filming a sustainability event, and the high school kids had gone out doing reports on various kinds of sustainability, and they'd gone and told everybody, and the video shows us, everybody in the community, come and hear high school kids' concerns about what's happening to our environment. And they worked really hard. Her project was on trees, and she got up in the classroom at the school, and town was supposed to come and hear about what high school kids were worried about in their future. And there was like one person in the room. And we were filming this, and she burst into tears and couldn't figure out why older people didn't care about the world that we were giving our kids. And so I'll come back to this a little bit, because this is enormously important. We build places that make it very hard to get from one place to another, and I'll come back to this. Oh, here it is. I don't know if you saw this, but imagine you lived here. I don't know if this light works or a pointer. You lived in this house right here, and you had just moved in, and you didn't know anybody, and you made friends on the other side of the fence, and you said, gee, the holiday, Halloween's coming up. Let's get the kids together. We'll trick or treat, but we have a new baby, so we'll actually have to go over to your house, but you're carrying a lot of stuff, so I'll have to drive over. Well, I don't know how to drive over, so I Google it to try and figure out how to get to. I love it when batteries go dead. Come on. Happens to me every time. I'll Google it, and all right, I need help. Yeah, try it now. All right. Here's the house across the way. And so I Google it, and there is a route. You can go drive by car, and it'll only take 7 miles and 17 minutes to get to the house that's 35 feet away. Obviously, this is a true story, but it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's metaphorical. The last thing we think about is human need, what children need, what elderly need, what disabled people need. As we build American communities, we think about the needs of cars first. In fact, in some ways, we've built America not for human beings, for cars. This is a real intersection in Los Angeles, by the way, talking about concrete. And when I was a kid, I remember watching, Glenn, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you, Steve, you remember when Disneyland opened, and we all got there in front of the black and white TVs, and we're going to see Disneyland and Fantasyland and all these places on. So we had 13 kids in our house in New Jersey watching the opening of Disneyland. And towards the end of this opening, the camera pans back on the Magic Mountain, and Tinkerbell wasn't flying around yet. And you look over, and over the side is Highway 5. And Highway 5 had 5 cars on it. And it was a freeway. The roads are free, and they only got 5 people. Everybody in the United States, California went from like 8 million people to 40 million people over the last 40 years because of this. So the idea that cars were going to solve our problem was true in 1960. This is what LA looks like much of the time. When I moved to LA, they said, pick where you live very carefully, because once you get home, you're not going to want to go anywhere. You're just going to stay home. And so it was antisocial in a way, what's happened, because it's so hard to go absolutely anywhere. Well, your generation, the young people, are smart. You've realized this. So look what's happened to, this is a lousy slide, I need to redraw it, but younger drivers holding licenses 1983 versus 2010. Every age group in the US has dropped their driver's license attainment. Driving is bad for you. Raises your blood pressure, your cholesterol level, your cortisol level, your stress hormones, and your risk of having a heart attack. And that lasts for about the hour while you're driving and for about an hour after you drive. So any of you have ever bought a lottery ticket with a 1 in a million risk of winning? What is your 1 in a million risk of dying when you drive in the United States? 87 miles. So every time you drive 87 miles, you've bought a 1 in a million lottery ticket for death. So this solution, like we're going to abandon brownfields because they have a 1 in a million lifetime cancer risk if you live near a brownfield, and then drive 40 miles away, so you buy a lottery ticket for death every single day, makes absolutely no sense. Leading cause of death for children in the United States and young people your age is car crashes. And probably some of you have lost friends to car crashes already. So I'm the lead for the Healthy UCLA campus. And so one of the things we're pushing very hard, maybe you should think about it for your campus, is 20 is plenty. If you're hit by a car going 20 miles an hour, you're a pedestrian, you have a 5% chance of dying. If you're hit by a car going 40, you have an 85% chance of dying. So anything we can slow cars down really is good. And so Hoboken and a bunch of cities in the East and also in Europe have now put 20 is plenty laws in. The provost at UCLA said, Dick, if we do this, it'll take forever to get across campus. And I sat down and calculated, it took 27 seconds longer to get across campus at 20 miles an hour versus 40 miles an hour because of all the stop signs. So it really didn't make any difference. You pave things over, it gets hot. And so one of the leading the leading chronic disease in children is asthma. Now wait a minute, we pave and we're causing asthma? Well, when you pave, it gets hot. When the cars go by, they put out exhaust. If it gets really hot, everybody turns their air conditioner on. If everybody turns their air conditioner on, the pollution from the power plants goes up even higher. If the blacktop road cooks the air even more, you get more ozone, NOx, SOx, NOx formation, more ozone formation. As smog goes up, the risk of developing asthma goes up. So here's Los Angeles, and this is pretty good data. Kids that went off to high school athletes that were in a high air pollution area, by the time they finished high school, had 3 times the risk of becoming asthmatic versus the kids in good air pollution areas. So in fact, more Americans die, yes please, die of more people worldwide die of air pollution than die of car crashes, and car crashes aren't very good. You're a gentleman, thank you. Remember the lady in the video, and you know, it is very difficult being poor in America. It's very difficult being undereducated, and once you gain weight, it's very hard getting rid of it. And she was living in Oakland and trying to raise 7 grandchildren and dealing with all of that. This is the prevalence of obesity in the United States in 1991. Have any of you seen this map before? 3 or 4, yeah. I'll bet they're mostly health people. Here's obesity in the United States. So obesity, I won't go into the body mass index stuff. That is not so important. But Here's Michigan, you're already a winner in 1991. Here's 1997. Other states have imitated the leadership of Michigan and have caught up, but in fact you're being beaten by Indiana, the motor state, and Kentucky. Here's the most recent one I could find, is 2010. They had to invent not only a bright red color, but a stippled bright red color to really capture the higher and higher percentage rates. So in Texas, over 30% of the population is obese. So about 1/3 of the American population at this point is obese, which is body mass index over 35. 1/3 is overweight, and 1/3 is considered a healthy weight. Obesity is not good for you. It raises your risk of high blood pressure, of bad joints, for a woman of having a baby with a birth defect. We think 1/3 of our abdominal cancers are related to obesity. It's really quite serious. And the problem with Americans, and when I explain this to Governor Schwarzenegger, is we always think, oh, that's a problem of self-control in the individual. And I'm going to argue that it's actually what you do. It's an environmentally induced disease. Some of it's chemicals and fructose, but some of it is in environment in another way. Well, because I did environmental health, one day I sat down and calculated how much jet fuel we burned by the fact that everybody gained 10 pounds between 1990 and the year 2000. It came out to 350 million gallons of jet fuel every single year, $1.5 billion worth, just to haul around our additional adiposity during that time. So if you're concerned about sustainability, this would be one way to help it out. But it's a population issue I'm really focusing on. We have created an obesogenic environment. And it is obesogenic in terms of the food, in terms of the hormones we have in our environment, and also in terms of the advertising. So who advertised during the Super Bowl? Coke, Pepsi, GM, Ford. If you do everything those four groups tell you to do, you're going to weigh even more. I always love the fact that people are sitting there watching other people exercise while they eat chips and lay on the rug. And by the way, did you notice they're all beautiful? Males and females. So my students drove down Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood and looked at the billboards in Hollywood one day, and for, I think this was only 1 mile, and you can see what the ads are, entertainment and alcohol and everything else. What do you think the billboards in a poor neighborhood look like? So drink stuff that makes you stupid. Drink some more stuff that really makes you gain a lot of weight and get a pot belly. Eat stuff that makes you more overweight. And then if you do everything we tell you to do, go get stomach stapling surgery. And it's a metaphor for what we're doing, is we have this machine at the end to take care of you medically because we're driving you towards ill health. So the social environment that we're in is driving us towards this. So here's a factoid. The next time, and I know you're building a new site next to McDonald's, but when you go in and someone says, do you want to supersize that? One of your students is going to say, Glenn, if you supersize a meal, each time you add an ounce of body fat to your body. I'm not making this up. And an ounce of body fat has a healthcare cost of about $6 for a man and $3.50 for a woman. There's a larger metaphor here, because what we've done is, over and over again as Americans, we've traded off. We want this short-term benefit. This stuff tastes good, it's designed to taste good, it's got fat, sugar, and salt. Human beings like that. But it comes with real long-term costs. And really, and one of the arguments I'm going to make is we need to calculate the long-term costs, including the health costs of these larger decisions that we're making. Remember, I talked the bad things that happen if I'm overweight, but here's one that really is probably the most important one. As our weight goes up, our risk of becoming diabetic goes up dramatically. So this is for me. If my body mass is, I hate to admit this, is about here, so I have 4 times the risk of becoming diabetic. If I keep gaining weight, my risk becomes 40 times for becoming type 2 diabetic. And for a woman, look at the difference between men and women. Nobody's really explained why, but women carry huge risks for type 2 diabetes as they gain weight. What do you think happened to the maps for diabetes in the United States? Here's 1994. Michigan at 6% or so. 2001, close to 7.5%. 2007, most recent data I could get. So now we have, in many states, 10% of the population has a disease that's going to cost people their eyes, their kidneys, and their feet. That nice man, Ray, that was getting the hyperbaric treatments for his diabetes, and they were scraping at his feet for the gangrene of his feet, he really has started to really watch his diet very aggressively. He has not had the amputation yet, but sitting there with him, I almost burst into tears as we were filming him talk about what he was confronting. So when I was a young pediatrician, I'd go to the children's diabetes clinic, and all the kids had insulin-dependent type 1 diabetes, juvenile diabetes. Today, if you go to the kids' diabetes clinic, it's more than half the kids, that's what he's saying here, have type 2 adult onset diabetes. It's not the insulin dependent necessarily. This is the stuff they usually would treat people my age for, and now we're doing it. We have 16-year-olds with diseases of 60-year-olds, the heart failure, the other issues. And this study just came out recently. The risk of a child, the survival for type 2 diabetes kids now is worse than the old juvenile diabetes children, partly because they have all these other, what we call comorbidities, other diseases at the same time. So I'm really depressing you, and I'm going to stop in a minute. This is the only treatment that we know that works with for type 2 diabetes, that works with no side effects. You walk. You walk, you walk. So if you remember nothing else, you've got to build communities that encourage, entice, and make it easy for people to walk. Reduce your risk of diabetes. Over 6 months, you do a lot of walking every single day, you reduce your risk by about 50%. It really does work. And I think in ways, so I put this for a little relief, but Howie Frumkin, my friend, dreamed up the fact that we've been subjected to the American Never Walk campaign. This is our first book that we wrote together. And he said, strategy number 1 for never walking is don't build sidewalks. So this is Atlanta, where I work, Buford Highway. And here are mostly poor people and African Americans and immigrants that lived along the highway. And it was a mile between crosswalks. They had to, you can imagine if you're trying to get a job downtown, it's a mile for a crosswalk in 90-degree heat. Of course you're going to jaywalk across the street. Build repellent sidewalks. This is Arizona. You want to cross that street in a hot day? Allow sidewalks to disintegrate. Build treacherous sidewalks. Like to be in a wheelchair on that street sidewalk? I think I'm trying to keep them out of the Wendy's. I love this one. Now this one. This is the absurdity of having the homeowner be responsible for the sidewalk. It's an infrastructure. We don't make the homeowner responsible for the street in front of their house. It's a public amenity and a means of transportation. This is a liver biopsy, and you can see the uniformity of cells in this one. No. There's a teenage word to describe this. What is it? Starts with a B. Boring. So we interviewed in the video series 6 teenage girls in Smyrna, Georgia, describing their lives where every single thing they wanted to do, they had to ask somebody to give them a ride to the mall, give me a ride to church, give me a ride to anywhere. I love this. He took this one in Hawaii. You go there to be on a nice, healthy vacation. Make everything car accessible, everything, like pharmacies, dry cleaners, liquor stores, baked goods, flowers, auto service, fine food, coffee, and this is my favorite, banking. Because they have Braille buttons for blind drivers and the drive-up banking. Well, only in Las Vegas, mailboxes, only in Las Vegas can you get married driving through in your car. If your marriage doesn't work out, you can do drive-through child support payments in Florida. And of course, sooner or later, we all end up to the end of our lives, also in Florida and Alabama. You can go to drive-through funeral homes and pay your respects. And here's this poor dog that's trying to convince this person to walk. By the way, people that own dogs actually walk more than other people. It's a good thing for your health. But I'm going to skip this one. So we know that walking's good for us. We do everything we can to make it hard. Look at this. This is new data. You've not seen this one before, Glenn. This is a comparison of the health of Americans 20 years ago with good physical exams and lab tests and everything else versus a couple years ago. And people in the prime earning years of life, 46 to 64. Do you think they got healthier or better? If you ask people, how do you feel, and they say, I'm in excellent health, they're usually right. You think it went up or down? That's a big deal. Do you need help to get through your life? Up or down? 50% increase. Do you need a cane or a wheelchair? These are people in their 50s, early 60s. 9 to 14%. Huge, I'm sorry, there's the slide. 3 to 7% for needing it. That's a big change for people not that old. What happened to smoking and obesity? Smoking went down. Obesity went up. This is the one that shocks me, and this is the one relevant to you and your design. No physical activity. The prevalence of no physical activity went from 17% to 50%. Maybe part of it's computers, maybe it's other things. But we doctors have been wagging our finger at people for 30 years saying, you gotta walk, you gotta exercise, you gotta go to the gym, you gotta get a rowing machine. Look how successful we've been. We've been a complete failure. So really, if you remember nothing else, we've got to create environments that are irresistible in terms of making people want to walk, to be physically active, to get out and to socialize. So I'm going to skip this. Glenn asked me for some data. This is actually brand new. It's not even published officially. It's a preprint on a study that's been done using very robust data looking at urban plans and very high quality data of people's health from the California Health Interview Survey. A couple hundred towns across California. They compared cities that had a traditional grid like Savannah versus places like where I lived in Atlanta, where you've got these trees coming off main highways. The highways are busy, but you're all these endless dead ends. What do you think happens with obesity as you compare grid areas versus tree areas with this kind of arborization? If there's a lot of street connectivity, you have lower obesity. And they controlled for age and sex and race and education and smoking because you have all that data from this. And if you have good connectivity, you have lower heart disease, lower obesity. You know, if you have narrower streets, or wider streets, you have wider bodies. And bike lanes do reduce the rates of diabetes as well. So let me get into solutions. This is me when I was the Secret Service man guarding Governor Schwarzenegger. And it really was a California event in the West Steps of the Capitol. And what it was about was we put $14 billion a year in price supports for corn and soy. And probably some of you, your dad and mom grow corn. But Americans don't need to eat more commodity things like corn and soy. We do need to eat a lot more fruits and vegetables. Wasn't lost on California that we grow half of them. But we can grow a lot of fruits and vegetables here in Michigan too. So changing food policy is number one. Number two, before 1970, nobody ever had high fructose corn sugar. Now the average American consumes 63 pounds of this stuff a year. We're slowly getting it out, but you don't need fructose. Fructose is really toxic to your body. And I won't get into it, the medical stuff right now, because I'm running out of time. I'm sorry, this upsets people. We tax things that aren't good for you. We tax nicotine, cigarettes. We tax alcohol, and it really does work. You see declines in prevalence when people use these things. We've got to tax sugar because people don't need it. Yes, your Coke is going to cost, instead of $1.25, $1.40. you can afford the 15 cents, given the harm those 15 teaspoons of sugar are doing to you. At a penny a teaspoon, we would raise about $14 to $20 billion a year, and we need to spend it on your generation and the younger generation, not on me, to put health interventions in place to protect you. We need to build schools that are close to where people live. We build schools that are, require you to be in a car for a long period of time. And we've seen dramatic decreases in the amount of physical activity and decreases in kids' fitness because they don't walk or bike to school anymore. Child that walks or bikes to school learns better, behaves better, socializes better, weighs less than a child that stays home. I can give you that data. It's very strong data. So the Academy of Pediatrics, you think of all these nice old pediatricians are sitting around and writing prescriptions for how much immunizations you ought to get, and you ought to get this and get that. This is the first time in the history of the Academy of Pediatrics they wrote a prescription for where kids ought to grow up. They said children need to grow up in neighborhoods where they have increasing autonomy as they get older. They can go out, be active. And Steve, when we were kids, we went out the door on Saturday morning, we came home when the street lights went on, and now kids have almost none of that autonomy. I bet some of you had to be driven almost everywhere you went. Institute of Medicine. I teach my students at UCLA, if it's boring, it must be important. So the Senate Rules Committee, really important. Office of Management and Budget runs the United States. They're really important. Institute of Medicine, the top 1,000 doctors in the United States are asked, how do we stop the obesity epidemic? And they had 16 recommendations. Urban planners, architects. Look at recommendation number 1. Make promotion of physical activity a priority by substantially increasing places and opportunities for such activity. So as I look at the map of Detroit, you have plenty of open space, putting that space in for people to be active. If you're active when you're young, that's good for you. If you're active when you're old, it's good for you. At my age, if you walk about half the time, 45 minutes, 3 days a week, your brain gets bigger. It's actually good at my age for your brain to get bigger, not necessarily at other ages. And if you don't, your brain gets smaller by about 1.5%. The difference is about 3% in brain growth. So being physically active at all ages is good for us. And I was with Joyce Lee yesterday. She was very involved with Mayor Bloomberg on this design. This is Cooper Union in New York. Every building in America needs to be designed with pleasant and attractive stairways as you go in. 1 flight of stairs a day for a year is a pound of body weight in terms of fat being burned, calories being burned. Elevators consume, depends on the building, but something like 10% of all the fossil fuel energy in a building. So it's much better, and I love the fact that you have reasonably good stairways here. When I built buildings at CDC, I demanded attractive stairways with nice daylighting that you could look out and big meeting rooms off the landings so that people would socialize, but also would be encouraged to take the stairs. Kaiser Permanente's adopted this. Take the route of most resistance. I just don't know how they got their safety people to approve it. What did he put this in for? Culture is what our friends do influences us. Chronic diseases are communicable. Chronic diseases are communicable. If all your friends are drinking a lot most of the time, no matter what your willpower is like, you're going to drink more. If all your friends sit around, smoke, and pretend it's Mad Men, they're going to act that way. Behaviors are contagious. So this is cyclovia, where we shut down major routes in LA. Other cities do it too. In the beginning, the police department said, we don't want this to happen. The retailers said, we don't want this to happen. Transportation said, we don't want this to happen. 250,000 people showed up. They discovered that it was actually pretty nice bicycling downtown to downtown Los Angeles. There were nice buildings, there were nice people. And now we're doing it about 3 times a year. We're trying to make it normative and we've seen a big shift in people bicycling just with creating festivals. And festivals are good for mental health too. I think art's really good for mental health. And here's a metaphor. By the way, one colleague is Don Shoup, who's the parking czar of America, and he does all this research. And Don says that every parking spot on a road should be metered. so that people move along. It actually helps retail. And all the money from those meters needs to go to maintain the sidewalk and maintain the public realm that is in that spot. So the retailers actually want it. And when they've done this in Pasadena and other cities, really thinking about parking revenue has changed the interface. These rental bike things are really good. This is in Washington, D.C. I did notice when I was in Washington, they had these 2 police vehicles near the bike loan places. And for fun, I thought, gee, I wonder what they cost. And I wonder how many calories you burn on these 2 police vehicles. So I calculated it up, and one costs 5 to 7 times more than the other one. And on one, you burn 3 times as many calories as the other. So it's a metaphor for America. Why would we buy something that costs $7,000 that requires lots of maintenance when a human being can actually lose weight and get stronger if they're biking around on it? And I love the fact that the cops on the Segways are fatter than the cop on the mountain bike. Transit is good for you. We call it active transportation because you got to walk to the transit. So here's when they put the Charlotte, North Carolina light rail in place. 2 years later, they went back. They had been doing a study for another reason. They went back, said, do you use the light rail? And measured their height and weight. People using the light rail, 5.5 feet tall, had lost about 6.5 pounds. We've gained more than that, but if everybody lost 6.5 pounds, America would be a healthier place. And they're more likely to meet the Surgeon General's guidelines for physical activity. So when we do the calculation for fossil fuel savings for light rail, we have to start calculating the health savings from that much physical activity. What makes people happy? Oh, yeah. I don't know if you've got an art school at Lawrence, but I think really incorporating art into these decisions. When Indianapolis put the bike route in place, it was combined with a city arts project. So it really enticed people instead of preventing them to want to exercise, walk, and bike. It brought people out to do it even more. And this is a very Republican, very conservative town, and the governor and the mayor have really embraced Indianapolis as become a bike destination. This is the Beltline in Atlanta. I had 2 camera crews for 3 days in Atlanta and 2 crews here in Detroit for 3 days as we were filming it. If you want to talk about it, I will. 56% of home buyers want a home that's walkable at this point. People my age want to be in a walkable neighborhood because we don't drive so much anymore. And people your age want to be in a walkable neighborhood because it's really expensive to own a car. No one would bother converting an old railroad structure 3 stories up in the sky. So this is me with my 2-year-old grandson walking on the High Line in New York. This is now, not kidding, I can show you the data, the 10th most visited public structure in the world. Nobody goes to New York City without going on the High Line. And the entire Chelsea area and mid to downtown on the west side has completely changed. Yes, it's gentrification, but lots of housing, lots of good shops. It has had a huge effect to have a place that's pretty. And it's also a lot more fun to walk with a 2-year-old for a mile on the High Line than it is on New York City streets because of the cars and everything else. AIA has embraced, American Institute of Architects, has embraced health as a touchstone. This is their local leaders report. You can go online and get healthier communities through design. LEED has, U.S. Green Building Council says, and I think they're genuine, they're going to make health on a par with green. This is a bad slide, I gotta make a new one, but every general plan, every master plan needs to have a standalone health element and needs to have health written all the way through it. We've done this in California. What did he just say? We need to get rid of environmental impact assessment. We need to capture health impact assessments. I've read probably 40 environmental impact assessments, 997 pages of what happens to birds, bunnies, and Indian relics, and there's 3 pages on what happens to children, old people, and everybody else in between. We do not capture both the health benefits and the health risks. Unemployment is a health risk. By the way, I'm Joe Environmental. I'm very supportive, but we we look through a very tiny lens at a very complicated set of issues when we look at environmental impact assessments. I'm almost done. This is the highway in South Korea in Seoul. You've probably seen this picture, $1 billion, they tore it out. And they put in a place that people want to walk, that people want to talk to their neighbors. You don't need to wag your finger at somebody and say, go for a walk. You don't need to tell children to get out and run around day or night if you create environments that are irresistible for physical activity and human health. So, Urban Land Institute, top developers in the United States, now have 4 big documents that you can get on building healthy. This is 10 principles for building healthy places. And next to last slides. Remember the house where we put people last? This is the big developer saying, put people first. As you think about the decision, what are the needs of human beings? And here's my favorite. Make healthy choices easy. Because right now in the US, we've over and over again made unhealthy choices easy. And this is a big shift for us. So I'll just skip this. I love these, no dumping, but this one is the one-way stencil we ought to put all across Detroit. General Motors would get mad at me, but we still need to put it all the way across Detroit. So with that, let me stop, and I hope I didn't go over time too much, Glenn, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you, and we're going to have a little time for questions. Before we get there, I do need to acknowledge some people that are here. Number one is this lecture is a day-night double-header. The daytime session was over at UDM, University of Detroit Mercy, and they're represented tonight by Will Wittig, the Dean, and Steve Vogel, Professor and former Dean, Dean Emeritus. I don't know what title you have anymore. And Steve's lovely spouse, Anita. This particular lecture is co-hosted by our College of Arts and Sciences, represented by Dean Xiaoping Moore, and Dr. Marburger, who is always with Dean Moore. I don't know why. You all seem to like each other. And I'd like to also acknowledge the presence of our provost, Dr. Maria Voss. And for anyone that is an architect that needs the continuing education credits, there is a sign-up sheet and a podium in the back of the room, and please sign up for this. And I am absolutely convinced that there's health, safety, welfare credit in your future if you sign up for this, which, as you know, is the most difficult to get in the AIA. So with that stated, the ground rules are, this is being recorded, so I'm going to circulate around the room. Please hold up your hand and wait till I get the microphone to you, or else your question will not be heard. Are there any questions? Questions? Okay, okay. I was always going to prime the pump with a question if I had to. And go ahead.
So I know you said a lot about like walking. I'm assuming you mean all physical activity then? Like even if you do running, biking, weightlifting, swimming, all kinds of physical activity is also applicable to what you said here?
Yeah, absolutely. All aerobic activity is good, and weightlifting is good, which is a little less aerobic, but it's still strength building. The reason I emphasize walking is it's the one exercise you almost can do your entire life. So especially as you age, Chinese have an aphorism, and it is, death takes you by way of the feet, and you have got to keep moving. And it is the best way to maintain health. I can't run anymore very easily, but I can still hike, and I do a lot of hiking, and I try and swim.
Any other questions from the audience? Because I have a couple.
Great
here.
comment, though.
Yeah. Wait. You can't. You won't be on the microphone for the recording.
My question for Dr. Jackson is, tell us what your favorite stair in the world is.
Whoa.
This is in the world, okay?
My favorite in New York is the entry stairway to the Metropolitan Museum of Art on Fifth Avenue, both outdoors and inside, going to the second floor. And back in 1965, Thomas Hoving, I think, wanted to rip the stairway out and put escalators up. And people became outraged and said, never, never do it. I'm going to give you an odd stairway because there are a number of them in European cities, and Italy in particular has them. My favorite city in Italy, actually I love them all, but Bologna has the most wonderful sets of stairways up to the hills. And you pass these lovely chapels and other things. And you cannot do this exercise without smiling. And you feel, when you get to the chapel, blessed when you get to the top and have the view of the city.
Other questions? Yes.
I wasn't prepared for that one.
I know you mentioned, like in, was that Seoul? The city
Yes.
that they ripped out the highway and did that. Are there any other cities that, even if it's just a place or the city in general, that you really look to as like a model city for
Oh, thank
exercise?
you so much. What's your name? Kara. Hey, Kara, thank you.
Kara.
So, the city that's really remarkable is Portland ripped out the freeway that was next to the river and put in a lovely park. And Portland's now up to about 15 to 18% bicycling. Boulder is even a little higher because under Olmsted, way back when, they ran bike routes all the way along all the rivers and streams. A more practical example is Yonkers, New York. I think it's Yonkers. It's where the Sawmill River goes through. And it's the Sawmill River Parkway, and the Sawmill River goes through, and they had a sawmill there for 200 years. And 100 years ago, they decided they needed a DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. So they ripped out the sawmill, they paved over the entire thing, and it was like that for 100 years, and downtown was ugly, and nobody wanted to go there. They ripped it out and restored the river. And I think this unroofing of rivers is something we ought to be doing. I'm advocating very strongly that Los Angeles needs to do it because in order to please Governor Schwartz, no, not really. He was the Terminator, and if you see the movie The Terminator, the motorcycle going all up and down the LA River in this giant concrete sluice, because somehow we thought that Mother Nature would be happier if we took all the water that fell on Los Angeles and rushed it out to the ocean with all the shopping carts and everything else. And it's the wrong thing to do. We need that water in LA to do groundwater recharge and capture it. Olmsted had a plan, as Olmsted's sons, had a plan to have basically recharge basins and ball fields. And so what if they flood, a month a year, and there'd be carriageways, and there would be a route, and we're advocating very strongly for a bike route, walking route that goes all the way from the poorest neighborhoods in Los Angeles all the way to downtown. And a lot of these poor folks, and I'm not making this up, are bicycling to work in wintertime at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning when it's desperately dark and dangerous on those roads because they can't afford cars. And there ought to, I can't fix all their needs, but at least giving them a safe way to get to work is the least a human being ought to have. So we haven't gotten there in LA. The Bay Area did something. I'm giving you a long answer, but San Francisco Bay Area, we got the TARP funding. They took all the individual bike routes and they figured out how they could connect them to destinations, whether it was the BART station or to schools or to retail. Because if you want people to bicycle, the bicycle route's got to go from somewhere to somewhere. It cannot just be this short recreational thing. So I have lots of favorite things. Thanks, Kim.
Other questions?
You guys must be brothers. You dress alike.
We're actually in the same studio. This question actually didn't dawn on me until I saw the Girl in Detroit on that book cover. And I'm actually in Professor Vogel's studio at UDM, and we're doing an urban project like a mile outside of the city. And we were talking in class one day about how a lot of the ground is actually considered toxic from the foundations and stuff. So would building like urban spaces and farms and gardens over this toxic ground, is that bad for the plants, and could that somehow get into people's diets and affect them themselves?
Oh, that's a very important question. Thank you. One, the top layer of soil near roadways still has a fair amount of lead in it from all the years we were burning gasoline. And what you have to worry about there are root crops. The lead does not transmigrate into things like tomatoes and things growing up, but you don't want to be eating potatoes or carrots from treated soil. Number two, if it's really badly treated, if it's a Superfund site, you got to scrape that stuff up and just remove it. You shouldn't be having a family garden there. The other thing you can do is actually bring in high quality and do raised beds. And most people actually like gardening and raised beds, and they do more of it. The amount of food you can get, and you know this, the amount of food you can get from an acre is really astonishing. And so, and it's physical activity. We're pushing very hard to have all schools have community gardens. And the kids will eat. People say, oh, kids just want pizza. Yeah, and kids, we all like pizza, but if you want kids to eat fruits and vegetables, if they grow it themselves, they're a lot more likely to be invested in that process. So there's a lot more elaborate answer than that, but the quick answers are if it's old soil and it's clean, it's okay. You can have root crops. Otherwise, you probably ought to have above the ground crops.
So, you know, we serve pizza to everyone before coming here. From now on, it's fruits and vegetables, okay? Pizza and vegetables. Pizza and vegetables? Compromise.
Pineapple pizzas.
Why don't you just shout it out and I'll repeat the questions for the microphone. Go ahead.
If today's General Motors make people fat, do you foresee a future in which tomorrow's General Motors would help people?
Okay, so if today's General Motors makes people fat, according to you, will tomorrow's General Motors do anything not to make people fat, to reverse that trend?
Very challenging. That's a good question. One is General Motors also makes buses. And so active transportation is good for us. And it's silly to move 4,000 pounds of steel every time we want to move 150 pounds of human beings. So that would be number one, to move towards transit. Number two, we will probably have self-driving cars relatively soon. The real inefficiency with cars is we're going to have 450 million people in your lifetime. Eventually, we don't have enough room for all these cars. I mean, China's up against it. They had a 7-day traffic jam by thinking that cars were going to fix a lot of their transit problems. Michigan has some terrific manufacturers. I don't have stock in them, but Steelcase and Herman Miller make now walking desks. Sitting is not good for you. You need to get up and move around. Says the guy who just had you sit for an hour. And the head of the American Diabetes Association is a friend of mine, has a stand-up treadmill desk. I said, how can you work on a treadmill desk? She goes, actually, you have to have a good treadmill. It can't vibrate, and it can't. But I actually can keep my body moving, and I think better at a standing desk, particularly with a very slow treadmill where I'm moving all the time. So I think there are opportunities for really good products. I actually don't think we should have people sitting like turtles at desks on computers. I know you spend a lot of time doing it. We probably need to have desks that, maybe this is something, a design question, to have desks that move up and down. They're really good ones where you're moving around and not being in the same spot. General Motors fought against, seat belts and catalytic converters and the rest, and I think having them really embrace the 21st century. I'm going to buy, I'm a typical Berkeley guy, I own a 15-year-old Volvo, which is beginning to fall apart, typical doctor. But I'm going to buy a Volt because I'm going to put solar on the roof. I'm not making this up. I'm going to put solar on the roof, and everybody I know that's bought a Chevy Volt has been happy with it. And they like having the gas if they really run out of the charge. But most of my driving is local. So, and they say it's a really well-made car. So wouldn't it be cool to really come up with cars that don't pollute? By the way, the most sustainable car you own is the car you already have. So really taking care of a vehicle as long as you can. If it's polluting, you got to get rid of it. We're in a big battle over the Port of Los Angeles because 60% of all the imports to the U.S. go through the Port of Los Angeles, and they're diesel locomotives moving back and forth, burning really bad stuff in very poor neighborhoods. We'll do the video about this. So really moving to much better fuel mixes, both for cars, trucks, and locomotives is something we're going to have to do soon.
I thought you were going to say you were going to buy a Tesla.
I can't afford a Tesla.
I alluded to this question in the car. what is the evidence between cities that are sprawl controlled and walkable and have great transit systems, and I think of Portland, San Francisco, Boston, and cities that are generally regarded as being auto cities, like Phoenix and Houston, and let's put Detroit in there.
The average person in New York City weighs about 6 pounds less than the average person in a sprawling area in the United States, number one. Now you could say, well, that's socioeconomic, except that New Yorkers now live longer than the average American, which wasn't true 15 years ago. Bloomberg takes credit for it. They did get rid of smoking and trans fats and a bunch of other things. But if you live in New York, you walk a lot. You climb a lot of steps. You're very physically active in New York. The difference is probably about 6 pounds. Weight is not as important as actually the physical activity. So let me state that again because it's really important. I talked about weight, but the physical activity is really, really important. So that's number one. Number two, Michael Jarrett's done studies he's a professor at Berkeley, in areas that are live, work, play, in subdivisions in Riverside County and elsewhere in California, new ones that are opened up, and compare physical activity in the children moving into these subdivisions using accelerometers, using GPS, and children living in so-called traditional crushed worm suburbs like this. And by the way, it's called crushed worm because that's what it looks like from an airplane, all that dead ends. Again, the physical activity level in kids is about 30 to 40% higher in an area where kids have destinations and have autonomy. I just showed the more theoretical meta thing with enormous amounts of computer assessment of many cities and comparing this. The big argument that the antis make against this is, well, people that want to move to walkable communities, and therefore that's why they walk more and they're healthier, because they self-select to be in a healthy community, and that's been the biggest criticism. But I think that's going away. The data is really becoming very robust. I took a slide out, but when Howie and I did the first book, there were only 60 articles that talked about built environment and health over the previous 10 years. Since then, just over the next 10 years, there have been 650 major articles in the medical literature. So it's become far more robust, partly because a lot of foundations are putting money in, CDC and NIH are putting money in.
Questions? Just reflect on something. I had, my first year here, I had, I mean, it's a tough job, but someone's got to have it. I taught a month in Paris one summer for our Paris studio. And if you've ever lived in Paris, we lived in a neighborhood in Paris near the Bastille. And great transit. And Paris is an immensely walkable city. We walked everywhere. You know, we did student tours, walked between 6 and 10 miles a day, which is that's a pretty good walk. And I ate my way through Paris. Did not restrict diet at all.
Everybody says that.
But the portions are smaller, and then the food is very healthy. And in 4 weeks of eating my way through Paris, walking 6 to 10 miles a day, I lost 6 pounds. And it's amazing the whole concept of exercise. Doesn't matter what you eat if you exercise enough, except for sugar.
You know, and the thing that I'm told is Americans don't like density, and then they pay a lot of money to go to vacation in Paris, where they got 5-story dense buildings and dense streets. When I was at CDC, we would hire presidential management interns. They changed them from interns to presidential management fellows after Bill Clinton got himself in trouble. But we would hire these, and I would say 80% of them were young women. And they would move from Washington, D.C., and they'd be at CDC in Atlanta. In the first 2 months, they would all gain 15 pounds. I am not making this up. Every one of them said the same thing. I don't know, I'm just eating the same amount. I just have gained 15 pounds. I'm getting new clothes and everything else. Because when I was in Washington, D.C., we had the metro, we had places to go. I walked all the time. In Atlanta, you'll be picked up for vagrancy if you go for a walk. So I'm overstating that, but not by much. It's very hard. They're finally beginning to fix it. But there was not a sidewalk within miles of CDC. And the very first time we rolled out the Surgeon General's report, I'm yelling at the directors meeting saying, wait a minute, we're telling people to walk and there's not a sidewalk within 5 miles of CDC? We've got to fix this. They thought I was crazy, but now they've got walking trails all the way around, and the new buildings all have big foyers with walking stairways and daylighting. So
it's good to sometimes be crazy.
Well, on that note, on the note of being crazy, we're going to end tonight's session. Thank you all for coming, and we really appreciate Dr. Richard Jackson.
Thank you.